are leaving, I want to tell you a story. Kathy mentioned to you last week that I was up in Cleveland at a meeting. We installed 3 new national officers, and there were hundreds of people at this wonderful meeting and worship service at Pilgrim Church in the city of Cleveland, in the old inner city. And it's one of these beautiful old 1890 churches, massive stone church. On the way to the meeting, we were, go ahead, let's go on that. Nancy, you got a guy coming with you here. Okay, good. On the way to the meeting, we were all on buses, and my cell phone rang. And it was one of those moments when I'd wish I'd turned it off, but I hadn't, and thank goodness I hadn't. I looked at the message, who it was coming from, and it was from John Rankel. John Rankel was the director of Precious Cargo, as some of you know, and he became for a short time our administrator. John got an infection. It's an infection that mainly young men get, and it attacked his heart. And it really destroyed his heart. And he had to retire from his position here and move back to his family in Connecticut to wait for a heart transplant. And he waited, and he waited, and he waited, and he waited. He's been on our prayer list for 3 years now. John finally had his heart transplant some months ago. And as you know, heart transplants are not easy because you're continuing to fight rejection. After months of going back and forth, John's doctor finally, at the end of last week, said, "John, I think you can now go out in public." He looked in the newspaper on Saturday and saw in the local UCC that the sermon was entitled "The Importance of the Prayer List." And so John decided to go. And he went to worship that day, and it was Laity Sunday. And the man got up to the pulpit to preach, began the sermon, and said, "Before I go farther, is there anyone here today who's been touched by a prayer list?" And several people commented. And finally, John stood up and took the microphone and told the story of our prayers on John's behalf for the last 3 years. And then John sat down. And at this point, I'm crying so much that my friends seated around me on the bus assume that there's been some terrible loss in my family. But what it is a terrible joy. But the story is not over. Because the man then got up to continue the sermon, a layperson in this congregation, and he said, "John, you're here today for a reason. 18 years ago, I had a heart transplant. Now you know why we have a prayer list. Look at the names now on this list, please, and join me in prayer."